Good morning, gentlemen. We're back. I have the privilege to interview Calvin Ellerby. The book we're talking about is it's called "It's Grampa's Time." You wrote this book on the inspiration God provided you with inspiration to write the book. My question, Cal, is what has the response been to this book?
Well, marketing is not my strength. I give all my books away, and I have a colleague who said that my business model really is pathetic. So, but you know what? To be honest with you, I have not heard anybody who has looked at the principles and said this is life to them. I don't profess to be any scholar or magnificent author, but I believe the principles are a word from the Lord. Mm-hmm. And so the response to that has been incredible. You know, the vision that the Lord gave me was that we would see 1 million men who would commit to laying hands on their children and their grandchildren and impart blessing into their lives. The book was a step in the process of trying to communicate on a broader scale. Again, we're just trying to mobilize spiritual leaders, patriarchs, to engage in this principle.
Well, Cal, I just I'm going to add to that. When I saw the book and when I read the book, as a young man growing up raising children, having a young family, I thought to myself, everybody needs to be blessing their children. This is got to be raising family 101 from a dad's point of view. So the book really had a huge impact on me, and not so much for my family, but for other families, especially young men.
Pieces of our app will be, it's called Airspace, HEIR space. And it will be a journal where you'll have your family tree and pictures and everything, be able to click on your family member and either type or speak into your phone blessings, then be able to archive those and make them available to your children going forward in the future. I just see it as being an excellent tool for passing blessing on.
I agree. Here in chapter 6 of your book, you discuss the importance of spiritual warfare. Your book states, as believers, we are involved in a spiritual battle with Satan and the kingdom of darkness, where he is determined to eradicate mankind. Satan hates humanity, hates the family. This is coming from the book, and is scheming to destroy it. You also quote 2 Corinthians 10:3-4, which states, as though we live in a world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. And I'm leading into this question because I think it's probably the most important element in the book, in my opinion, only, and we'll get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks.
$10.
Yeah, exactly, that and $10. Cal, could you expand on the spiritual warfare that Christian men need to be engaged in?
Yes. So let me preface my statement by saying this, that more than being even engaged is just being aware. You know, Paul said we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. Our fight is a spiritual fight. Therefore, if we're going to fight the fight, we need to fight it properly. And we need to understand that the tactics of the enemy are things like division and fighting and arguing and disunity and, you know, chaos relationally. Then that stuff spills into some of the social craziness that we are witnessing, because the breakdown, I forget who it was that said that in the United States, we don't have a crime issue, we have a fathering issue. And that is a profound statement, because when you take dad or grandpa out of the mix, or you make him a dysfunctional train wreck, it damages generations. You know, Moses said that the sins of the fathers would visit to the third and the fourth generation. And so many of us, you know, we fear that, because we all have regrets, and we all have, you know, we look at our behaviors and we go, oh man, that's going to carry on. But the second half of that verse says, but the blessing of God and the righteousness of God would visit 1,000 generations. So my conviction is this, that when we're dealing with spiritual warfare, let's start with awareness ahead of everything else. This is a spiritual fight, and part of our alignment in recognizing God's positional placement of us in the battle is a big part of the solution. You know, we're humans, so we make mistakes and we do things that are dumb and whatever. But if I'm going to win this fight, I need to fight it God's way. And that means by starting and recognizing that He has created a structure. So if you read in I think this is in the book, but I know it is, the Ephesians 6 layout of the principalities and the powers and the spiritual forces in dark places, there's a hierarchical role, like a military structure in those titles.
Yeah.
That same principle applies to us on the kingdom of light. God has created, you know, we know that the Archangel Michael is a high-ranking, powerful entity.
Mm-hmm.
But God has chosen to include us in that hierarchy. Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing.
He's chosen to include us in that hierarchy. That's why the spiritual fight to see us dismantled and dislodged is so ferocious. But if we're going to fight back, we need to fight it God's way. And that starts with an awareness in the spirit.
Yeah.
I'm not a very touchy-feely guy, so I'll admit that up front. And the pressure on people to turn their walk with God into an emotional, whatever expression, for me, is not an accurate way for me to deal with this. I need to stop and look at the thing pragmatically and say, this is a positional thing. I need to be aware of the fact that God has put me in the fight in a spiritual role for a reason. Therefore, if I don't feel emotional, or if I do feel, either one is almost irrelevant. Because if I embrace the positional thing and I'm aware of that, then when I pray, or then when I choose to walk with Jesus at a deeper level, I understand that I am opening up pathways to the next generation that I may have impeded.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at, yes, I believe in dealing with spiritual forces. I believe in prayer. I believe in walking godly, but I'm not trying to psych myself up. That's not my point.
Yeah.
I'm aware spiritually that the position that God has put me in is integral to the blessing of God moving from generation to generation. Therefore, my spiritual fight takes on a different context.
Yeah.
In chapter 7 of the book, entitled Embrace Your Patriarchal Appointment, The book's study guide, and I got this from your study guide, indicates that the spiritual forces that we wrestle with have for decades been working through the channels of education, entertainment, politics, etc., to minimize and displace the influence and leadership of the patriarchs. We are witnessing the fruit of a culture and society that has been largely void of godly leadership. And your study guide goes on to talk about that theme. So Cal, my question to you is, in that context, what are Christian men to do as the family patriarch, dealing with the context of the culture we're dealing with, and what practical steps would you encourage or recommend?
Buy my book. No. I'm just kidding.
No.
You'd know that my business model is pathetic. Anyways, what should they do in a practical sense? I would say they need to learn the 5-step blueprint for starters. They need to understand the positional versus the behavioral significance of this calling. They need to understand what the blessing is. And I have gone through the Old Testament and the New Testament looking for some clues as to whether or not there's any consistent patterns when passing on the blessing. And I have summarized them into 5 categories.
Yes.
That we would know God, that we would be full of his Spirit, we would live under his favor, we would understand his purpose for our life, and he would understand that we would understand that we are the design of God. We are fearfully and wonderfully made, with the breath of God having been put into us. So understand what the blessing is. And I know that I might be jumping ahead here, Kevin, but the third thing is that get with your grandchildren and your children and get your hands on them. Because there's something in the scriptures that is clear about the laying on of hands, that there is impartation that is profound. And I often get asked, well, I don't have the kind of relationship with my kids where they would let that happen. And I say, then get a picture on your phone and lay hands on your picture on your phone.
Amen.
And do proxy. But get your hands on those kids and pass blessing on. The fourth thing is to speak life into their life. Words set the course for our lives. All of us, even as older guys, can look back at times, even as children, where somebody said something to us that impacted us or influenced us either positively or negatively. Depending on the role of that individual in our life, the more significance of that, influence. So speak life into them, text them, email them, phone them, talk in person, whatever it is. Words are chosen by God as a vehicle for transformation. Use them. And the fifth thing is that we do this in faith. And people, have said, well, yeah, you do everything in faith. This became so powerfully clear to me that faith is the thing that releases that blessing from one generation to the next. And I'll tell you why I think that. In Genesis 48, Jacob knew that he was on his deathbed. The Bible says he was on his deathbed. He rallied his strength, got up off the couch, laid his hands on those kids. Then in chapter 49, he calls all 12 of his other sons together, and he blesses each of them or speaks into their life directions that was going to set the course for their life. Then he died. He didn't have the privilege of seeing the fruit of those things. And we know if you follow each person, we know that some went sideways and some were more significant or whatever it was. But my point is that if it wasn't done in faith, why would he do it? He's like, I'm just going to stay here on the couch and die. I got no energy left. What difference does it make? But there was something so profound and so powerful that it says he rallied his strength and got up off his couch and blessed his family.
You talk about the blessing in step 2. It says the purpose of the blessing is to transfer or impart the divine covering of God over the recipient and to set the course for their lives. And in step 2, you break it out into these 5 other steps. You talk about the knowledge of God, the power of God, the favor of God, the purpose of God, the design of God. And you talk about that a little more as well. So for the men listening, I encourage you, buy the book. It gives you a great guideline, and it's really encouraged me. It's changed Kathy and I, our devotions in the morning when we have devotions. I don't say we have them every day, but we try to have them every day. I pray a blessing over Kathy, and Cal, I'll be blessing my children now through those pictures, and I hope that his guideline helps the men that are listening to this as well.
Again, Kevin, just to reaffirm, this is a positional, not a behavioral. It's what's going on that we can't see.
Just as an aside, Cal, Pastor Rick is going to be interested to hear this. I'm not a touchy-feely guy either, just so you know. and
I am. So 1 out of 3 ain't bad.
Yeah, so we are the majority here, and we'll leave it at that.
I would like to say one thing in closing. God never designed us to walk alone. I would encourage your patriarchs and your men to partner up with other guys of like faith and like heart, and hold one another accountable, encourage one another, mobilize and motivate one another. Because Nehemiah said, trust in the Lord, or remember the Lord. Don't be afraid, and fight for your families.
Yes. Yeah.
I agree.
We need to do it together.